General Secretary Gorbachev, if you seek peace, if you seek prosperity for the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe, if you seek liberalization, come here to this gate. Mr. Gorbachev, open this gate. Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
The fall of the Berlin Wall helped to reunite Berlin and relieve much of the tension between the Soviet Union and the Allied powers. After World War II, the Allied powers of France, Great Britain, the United States, and the Soviet Union signed the Potsdam Agreement, which split Germany into 4 sections, one for each power. Additionally, Berlin was split into 4 sections as well, and was to be the center of operations for all 4 powers. During World War II, the Allied powers were allies out of necessity. After World War II, however, the relationship between the USSR and the other 3 powers rapidly deteriorated. This deterioration started with the Marshall Plan and its disputes with the UN. The US wanted to rebuild Germany, whereas the Soviets wanted to ransack everything. Eventually, the US and its allies, France and Great Britain, made a commitment to rebuild Germany. On May 3, 1949, West Germany became an independent state, the Federal Republic of Germany. The USSR was unhappy with this decision, and its hostility towards the West grew. On October 7, 1949, the USSR made East Germany into a sovereign nation, the German Democratic Republic. Furthermore, during the Chinese Civil War, the Soviets supported Chairman Mao and the Communists, whereas the US supported the official government of China. After the Korean War broke out, many US political figures saw the expansion of communism into China as a failure to contain the Soviets and their undesirable form of government. On March 5, 1946, Winston Churchill delivered his Iron Curtain speech, calling for action against the Soviets' expansionist policies. He talked about how an Iron Curtain descended on Eastern Europe, dividing Europe into capitalist and communist countries. Churchill also spoke of communist fifth columns that were operating throughout Western and Southern Europe, and advised that when dealing with the Soviets, there was nothing which they admire so much as strength, and there is nothing for which they have less respect than for military weakness. Eventually, all of these events, along with the looting of everything and everybody on the eastern side of Berlin, resulted in the Cold War.
On August 13, 1961, the German Democratic Republic, also known as East Germany, erected a barbed wire fence on the border of East and West Berlin in the middle of the night. There had been rumors that East Germany would do something to prevent the mass exodus of citizens from East Berlin to West Berlin. On August 15th, work began on constructing a concrete version of the wall. As time went on, the wall gained more features, including watchtowers and checkpoints for the occasional official to cross through. Once the wall was constructed, the citizens of East Berlin began to experience negative consequences. They had no access to the rest of Germany, or to the rest of the world for that matter. They were entirely helpless in East Berlin during the existence of the Berlin Wall. The only way to ensure that one would have a decent education or job is to join the FDJ, or Freie Deutsche Jugend, which means Free German Youth. The FDJ was basically the youth organization for the Socialist Unity Party, and was highly communist. The main problem that faced East Berlin was that the people who lived there were unable to buy items they needed, but not because they had no money. It was because the items they needed weren't there. The citizens of East Berlin were taught and believed that the people of West Berlin were fascist puppets of an American regime out to destroy East Berlin, and that they were lucky to have Soviets' protection. In West Berlin, the situation was drastically different. From 1961 to 1989, Western Berlin rebuilt and prospered greatly, mostly due to the fact that the West Berlin government injected a great deal of money into the economy. Some families came, enticed by handsome grants given by the city to start a family. This would in turn create revenue thanks to taxes of all kinds. Revenue which would then be used to create buildings where people would be employed and make money to spend. This was the capitalist idea that allowed West Berlin to thrive in spite of negative attitudes from the Soviets and the poorer citizens of East Berlin. Making sure West Berlin was economically stable was difficult, but the city managed to manufacture valuable and desirable products.
On November 9th, 1989, the Berlin Wall fell. People came from all over Berlin, armed with sledgehammers, chisels, pickaxes, and whatever demolition tools they could find in order to break down the border that had split their city and limited their lives for the past 28 years. The wall had divided families and friends who had lived on opposite sides of the city. The Berlin Wall fell due to the will of the people. In 1987, President Ronald Reagan gave a speech at the Brandenburg Gate, commanding Soviet General Secretary Mikhail Gorbachev to open this gate and tear down this wall. In 1989, Hungary removed its border fence with Austria, allowing East Germans to leave East Berlin without having to cross the wall. 13,000 East Germans crossed through Hungary to freedom. Without the wall, East Berliners were exposed to more technical advances that had arisen in West Berlin. For instance, people in East Berlin may not have had washing machines from before the wall, but in West Berlin, washing machines would not only have been more available, but would be more advanced than those that were owned in East Berlin. So, while people in West Berlin had been washing their clothes in automatic washing machines for years, people in East Berlin were finally exposed to these sorts of inventions. In addition, people didn't need to join any sort of communist organization in order to have access to decent education and jobs. Lastly, East Berliners were free to travel the world without fear of imprisonment or even death.
All in all, the fall of the Berlin Wall was extremely important to the economy and quality of life in East Berlin. In the years when the wall existed, East Berliners had trouble finding jobs and had very little chance of escaping. However, when the wall was removed, citizens of East Berlin were freed from the restrictive chains of communism that the Soviets forced upon them. Without the Berlin Wall, Berlin and Germany as a whole were reunited. On a much broader scale, much of the tension between capitalist West and communist East was lifted, so that geopolitical rivalry was diminished.